A very big and long video here, brewing as we do focus once again on the long term, carrying on with this thread of analysis we've been having now for a little bit of time, focusing specifically on the next few months here for Bitcoin. There is a few more probabilistic setups that have been brewing in the background that are now coming to fruition that do certainly favor a significant direction in a, I would say, significant way as well. I do want to preface this whole video by stating that, hey, if you're looking for a feel good, kumbaya, let's all hold hands, we're all going to make it, we're all going to the moon and beyond, and your shit coins are going with it, and you're going to retire your bloodline, well, you might retire your bloodline, but it'll be through means of financial suicide, perhaps, or at least that's what I would say is probabilistically likely right now. As always, though, I encourage you to check my numbers, to double check everything. Look, I'm just some fucking moron on the internet wearing a jersey for a city that I don't even live in, although I am very comfortable, I should say. And you should, as always, trust your own analysis, trust your own work over anyone else's. Anyways, with that said, let's start off with, actually, I completely forgot to mention this, but we actually do have a sale going on for all of our programs and services in the teachable link in the description below with the code LABOR in all capitals like LABOR, and then the year 2025, all one word, labor 2025 again applies to each and every one of the programs and services in the teachable link in the description below, and that'll get you 20% off, and the sale will end on next Monday. All right, cool. Now that we got through the old shilling there, let's start off with the very, very short term, which, like I said, not going to be a huge focus on this. You're going to see ebbs and flows here, but Thursday is actually the most likely day of any weekday to close negatively since this bull market began in 2023, with over 56% of all Thursdays closing negatively. As always, we care significantly more about the average gain and the average loss for this day. And in this case, putting these numbers into perspective, the average gain, if Bitcoin were to hit there, which I think is a little bit unlikely today, to be honest, but that would be just under 114,000 US dollars price per Bitcoin. And to the bottom side boundary, that would put us at around 109,800. And as always, we've seen this play out so many damn times. On the first pass of any one of these boundaries, you're typically going to look at a kind of play off of that. So for example, Bitcoin were to hit the 109,800-ish region today, you're probably going to see a little bit of a bounce, at least on the first pass. After that, game is over. But what I would say is that, hey, if you are a short-term time frame scalper, something to pay attention to, again, with the price action statistics, which is a part of Caretaker's indicator suite. Moving on from there, and now getting fully out of the short term and stating, hey, now we are going to be speaking about, the long term. So if you see short-term pops, like that's fine. If you see short-term drops, that's also fine. That is insignificant to what we're about to speak of. So there is, and this is honestly becoming one of my most favorite things to speak about because it really seems to piss off the right type of person, but a great study of how statistics and numbers are they just fucking are. And we have a phenomenon coming up in the next couple days here. I believe it's on the 6th or 7th, which would be this weekend. So Saturday or Sunday, depending upon where you live in the world. There is a new astrological phenomenon called a blood moon popping up. And we have seen several blood moons in the past. And we've seen several moons in the past as well. If you've been on this channel for a while now, you've seen many times that we've gone through the statistics and data of just plainly playing the moons as if, as if it's as simple as buying and selling when you get a full moon and then a new moon, and actually has been quite profitable. Now, a blood moon, as the name would imply, maybe a little bit more bloody. And we can look at past data for these moon dates. I've checked on both ChatGPT, Grok, and Google because they were all kind of given different answers at first. Then I finally got them all to agree with each other. And these are the dates that we've seen in the past 10 years. In fact, there's actually a couple more that I'll show you as well in 2018. But basically over the past 7 to 8 years, we've seen several of these occurrences. And what I've done is I've gone over here on the chart and I've marked off all of the ones that we've seen basically since 2018. And I will put it on the board right now. There it goes. And let's get rid of this. I'll come back to that a little bit later. And I'll just say, look at the chart with all these green vertical bars and just analysize it. Analysize it with your own eyes and tell me what you would think if you were just looking at this. And I'll give you a few seconds to kind of, take it in. Of course, there is one other example over here, which happened recently in March. And I think most people would agree in stating that these were generally preceding periods of long consolidations and yes, some downside in between. So what I've done is from that blood moon date to the next low, I've measured the percent drop and then how many days it took to get there. For example, the most recent one that we saw was on the 14th of March. This one fired off right here. From that date to the low was about 26 days, and Bitcoin dropped about 60% during that time. By the way, if you hate this astrology type shit, that's fine. We will get into other things a little bit later, which perhaps you will trust more of, or at least again, these are just numbers. At the end of the day, stats are fucking stats. Stats are fucking stats. Again, a few more examples, then we'll get into the actual data. But again, same thing over here in May of 2021. Again, fires off right here. Boom. From that period to your next major low was about a 26.25% drop down right here. That took 31 days to play out. And then also, I do want to also state that, hey, this whole period here was a very long corrective period, close to like 3 months or so. And kind of a lot of these were, of similar. Anyways, I won't bore you with the details of this. I'll just show you the results. And what we can see right here is that I have specifically looked at the date of the blood moon and then whatever the lowest price was within the first 30 days from that date. There's going to be some great correlation here as well in just a moment. But the low within 30 days on average has been about just under 24% from the blood moon date. Now we are rapidly approaching that date. Maybe Bitcoin's a little bit lower, maybe Bitcoin's a little bit higher than where it's at right now, but we could probably assume that it's going to be around here basically. So we'll start with that. The minimum move we've seen has been about 7.19%, so very, very low. In fact, that was actually back here on the lows from the 2018 cycle as Bitcoin reversed. And still, while it didn't really drop that much, to be fair, it still took about 70 days for Bitcoin to really get going again to the upside. But yeah, the low did happen relatively fast and wasn't that painful. The maximum move that we've seen thus far is about a 42 or a little bit over 42% move. And again, just putting this into perspective, what I'll do over here is that, within 30 days, might be within the first week, might be in the last week. I don't fucking know, but within 30 days, if we were to play out to the average, again, taking Bitcoin's current price as kind of an assumption that Bitcoin will be somewhere around here when this blood moon event does indeed happen, well, let's just see what the average shaved off of the current price actually would look like. That would put Bitcoin all the way down in the mid 80s. That would be about 85, 86,000 bucks. Again, these are averages. There's going to be some variance around these. Not going to be exact numbers, obviously, but that's not a crazy thing to expect based upon this. Even the minimum move at 7% or so would put Bitcoin somewhere around about 104. And in fact, I would say that the minimum move that we've seen in 2019 was very similar to the one that we just saw recently. So perhaps that's an indication. I won't draw any further conclusions from that, but let's also run with this one as a minimum as well. A 12% move, just again to put things in perspective. What would that look like? That would put Bitcoin at about 100,000 bucks. So I'd say 100,000 bucks minimum. Can things come down more than there? Absolutely yes. I mean, maybe things don't come down at all. Very, very possible. We're talking about probabilities, but in every single case, we have seen Bitcoin come down more within 30 days from that prospective signal firing off. Now, I want to relate this to something that is completely unrelated. And then we're going to go into some more mathematical models based upon other things as well, completely unrelated to this. But what I want to get into now is very specifically the interaction between everyone's favorite event that is likely coming up in September, which is the rate cuts. You've heard about this a million and one fucking times at this point. I don't want to repeat these, all these speculations, because at the end of the day, rate cuts are speculative. Anything, economically, event-wise is speculative unless you're an insider. So it's very, very difficult to get right. But what we do know is that if rate cuts were to happen, within the first month, within the first 30 days of a rate cut, we have always seen markets lower in the past like 20 years, maybe even 40 years. Obviously, Bitcoin's only seen this, once or twice. But if we go to traditional markets within the first month, yes, things are generally down. In some cases, double digits. In some cases, not that much, but they are generally down within 30 days. However, if you fast forward a year out from there, then things are generally up, which I do think is kind of the silver lining on things here, and hopefully offers at least a little bit of hope even in the long term. And I do think that Bitcoin spending some time correcting here, honestly, is a good thing long term. I do not think it would be a good thing if Bitcoin shot up to, I mean, obviously it would be good because, it feels good when it goes up. Like, feels fucking good, man. Feels really good in my feelers. But as far as like the long-term health, I don't think that'd be great if it just shot up from here without a correction first. Anyways, that's beside the point. So that date also aligns with potentially that rate cut around there as well, because that would be the middle of September. So that's coming up within about a week or so. Or perhaps like about 10 days, I guess. But around there, could correlate well. And then also we have this setup here, a setup that I have not had on this channel for a while now. But, we haven't really seen many of these to the downside. We've seen them mostly to the upside, especially as of recent, because it has been a bull market. And this is the volatility versus stochastic momentum setup. What are we looking at here? We're looking at first BBWP, which represents volatility, aka the dispersion of returns. Anytime that this thing gets down to extreme lows, which I define as anything below about 15 percentile, or less, and then expands back above that 15 percentile marker right here, we can then look for a major move on Bitcoin, typically between 20% to 40%. We'll go over the hard data in a moment here, but at the moment of expansion, which right now this one's not, you can see that it is literally on the floor at 1.19 percentile. So very, 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 very low. It will naturally expand, by the way, like it always does. It's a mathematical certainty nearly, but 15 percentile is the hurdle to beat. And in this case, if we were to see it expand, we then reference the direction of the stochastic oscillator to get a bias on direction. And as of right now, if we were to see expansion today, which we are not as of this moment, but if we were to see expansion today, this would obviously favor the downside because the 5-day stochastic oscillator is coming down very hard, losing not the critical zone, not just the bullish control zone, but also in the next tick or two, getting into the bearish control zone, I should add as well. And that's going to be showing downside pressure as long as Bitcoin is closing at least this next period below 122,700, which is rather high related to current price action. I don't think that that's going to happen in the next 3.5 days. Could be wrong about it. Very possible. But yes, as of right now, that would be a downside favor a downside setup that favors, well, the downside. Now, I've gone through Bitcoin's history over the past 10 years and marked off all of the prior occurrences of that setup. So again, we need to see volatility below 15 percentile, then pop back up above 15 percentile, and then the 5-day stochastic oscillator must be positioned to the downside. I'm going to take a sip of this water while you perhaps marinate on those thoughts. Okay, lovely. And there have been 12 occurrences in the past 8 or so years. And of those 12 occurrences, when we've seen volatility expand once again, 10 of those times did follow through with significant downside. So only 2 of the times did it fail, and Bitcoin actually went in the upside direction because volatility is going to expand, pretty much no matter what. But 2 of those times, yeah, it did fail. So that's about an 83.33% strike rate to produce, a sizable downside move. And again, it's not 100%. It's never going to be 100%, but I would say it's rather high probability, in alignment with the blood moon thing, in alignment with the interest rate cuts as well. And within an average time of 36 days, we have seen an average move of 34.5% almost. Let's put that in perspective for a moment here. Again, we have not seen volatility expand just yet. And I will even give this one some grace by taking the measurement from the high of this move thus far. And well, 34.5% move to the downside would put Bitcoin where? That would put Bitcoin at the low 80s. I personally do not think Bitcoin is going to go to the low 80s. Again, this is an average. It is not an exact. And I do expect that these moves over time are going to become less and less severe due to the declining volatility in Bitcoin over time. Anyways, what I've also gone ahead and done is a few other statistical measurements like the standard deviation to create a first standard deviation, and then also looked at the minimum and maximum as well. Standard deviation was about 11.5%, so that is a wide range to be fair. On the lower end of the first standard deviation, which encompasses about 68% of the results, we have seen we can kind of expect about 23% almost, and on the upper end about 46%. So I do think it's going to be closer to the bottom end of that first standard deviation if this fires off. Again, big if. And wait, what was that again? I already forgot. Too much weed, sir. Anyways, 23%. Taking that off of of the current high, that would put Bitcoin at about 95,000 bucks. I think anywhere between there and the average is probably fair game on a move like this. We would also see effectively a reconnect with that green moving average, which is going to correlate with a few other setups that we're about to speak about too. But even on the lowest end, the minimum move that we've seen from this setup, when it does play out, which there is about a 17% probability that it does not, but that has been about 17.5%. So again, putting that into perspective, just taking this from the high, which is kind of generous in my opinion, but hey, it is what it is. That puts Bitcoin at very low 100. So I can see validity to all of these numbers. Again, I'm not saying that Bitcoin can't bounce in the short term. It very well might. I mean, it's already kind of tried, I guess. 112,600 is the current high of this bounce, but I really wouldn't be super surprised if Bitcoin did bounce to like 115, 116, maybe even 117. Very possible. But that's beside the point. We're not focused on that right now. Now, let me get back into my notes here. My notes. Yes. And then let's move on here. So again, this setup has not fired off just yet. It is possible. There is a situation that exists that volatility continues to remain very, very low while the 5-day stochastic oscillator fully resets and then turns up, and then we see volatility expansion, in which case I would become extremely bullish for a big move to the upside, 30% perhaps or more. But as of right now, that would favor the downside. Look, I'm just calling a spade a spade. I'm not like happy about this information. I'm not like taking glee, or anything like this. I'm just presenting you the numbers. Take it as you will, or don't take it at all. That's completely fine. You don't have to. You can sign off on this video at any moment in time that you like. If you don't like what the fuck I'm saying, also if you do like what I'm saying, you can also sign off then too. It's up to you. Anyways, another signal that we've been tracking on this channel now is the weekly MACD signal. When we've seen the weekly MACD cross to the downside, it has signaled a corrective period very, very accurately for Bitcoin throughout this whole bull market in 2023. All of these green vertical bars represent that moment when we have seen that cross officially happen. And you'll notice very cleanly and clearly that this has been all of the corrective periods throughout this cycle. The most recent one happened in February of this year. That was about a 27% move to the downside over 63 days until Bitcoin found its low. And then, it still took time to like kind of dig itself sideways and up from there. But yeah, 63 days of general downside. Big corrective period. The time before that was in April of 2024. Again, took about 98 days to find the next low, and Bitcoin was almost 24% lower from the signal to the next major low. And yes, there were rallies in between. There were big rallies in between, by the way, as well. These were significant, double-digit percent rallies. And then, of course, the early on correction in 2023, same thing over here. Bitcoin down, not as much as the other ones, about 32%, but did take the longest out of anyone from that initial signal right here, which was 105 days. Of course, we've seen this in prior cycles as well, by the way. This effectively called the high and reversal from 2021, and also the first major drop down in, of course, in early 2021 when Bitcoin dropped off about 50% over 2 months. So, it does go onwards and forwards. I won't bore you with the details of this, but again, that would suggest we're in a period of very likely a prolonged consolidation, likely sideways and down. And this one is going to be remaining in a downside cross, at least on this next period, as long as Bitcoin's below about 124,000 bucks. I would think it's a little bit less likely that we see that number hit by end of week. Just personal opinion. Anyways, and again, maybe there is, I guess, slightly some hopium here because the days to find the low has been going down over time. 105, 98, 63. I don't know how much that's going to hold true, but I would still assume at least like a month, maybe 2 months, something like that, until Bitcoin finds a low, basically. Can I be wrong? Again, yes, absolutely. I'm very happy to be wrong about this. I hope that I am wrong about this, in fact. Anyways, moving on from there, I do want to also acknowledge that there is, and there does still exist, the potential for regular bearish divergence on the monthly RSI here for Bitcoin. In fact, right now we already have a couple drives off of these last couple highs, that being the high in March of last year, 2024, then the high in January of this year. And then, yes, it's still on a lower high here. So divergence does exist. Basically, any sort of a monthly closure below that red 5 EMA, which is 107 even, 107,000 even, that will confirm that. And generally, the target is going to be somewhere around that yellow moving average, which is as of right now. And yes, it is rising up rather rapidly, but it is as of right now at about 85,000 $5,000. That'll rise up about another $5,000 by the end of this month. So, it depends when Bitcoin approaches it. But if we do see a closure below 107, I would even say like on a weekly is probably good enough. Yes, I think that becomes a legitimate, like a very, very high likelihood that we will see play out with that bearish divergence. And like I said, that would be my general target for that, actually kind of minimum. Anyways, moving on from there, I also want to acknowledge something that we've been following as well that has been telling us recently, in the past month, that this is a time to be cautious and corrective, is all higher term timeframes stochastic momentum. We've seen the weekly time frame come down very hard here below the critical zone for several weeks now. It is now working its way outside of the bullish control zone. When we go to the bi-weekly time frame, it is also going to be crossing to the downside freshly for the first time in a very long time, since January of earlier this year, and also of course April 2024, and then again in May of 2023. Again, all of these were correlated to these corrective periods in Bitcoin's during this cycle. This one shows continued downside pressure as long as Bitcoin's below 117. We've seen 117, by the way, pop up several times now. That is I would go as far to say that as long as Bitcoin's basically below 117, I don't care how high Bitcoin rallies in the short term, as long as it's not below that, I personally will be favoring downside, or I'll be biased towards downside overall within the next month or two. Again, 117 I think is probably a big number here, just because it pops up so much. The 3-week time frame is also having its first fresh cross to the downside. That'll happen actually not at the end of this week, but at the end of next week. If Bitcoin's below 119,300, again, same thing here. All of these crosses to the downside in these regions have correlated with major highs, not just in this cycle, but in past cycles as well. As we've gone over before, the monthly time frame is actually still the one bastion of hopium right here at 102,500 is the pivot, but it is the odd man out. And I think that's a really important, point to be making, because when we go to the bi-monthly time frame, this one is going to be showing a downside cross if Bitcoin finishes not this month, but it'll be October. So very, very long time to go. A lot of things can happen. This can easily change. But if Bitcoin's below 111,700, then yes, this will be crossing the downside for the first time since when? Since July of 2021. And the time before that was September of 2017. And the time before that was, November of 2017. And the time before that was January of 2014. Again, these were all cycle highs before. I'll explain what I think is going to happen at the end of this cycle, or at least what I think the cycle is doing. And then the quarterly time frame, which does close at the end of this month, will actually have its first cross to the downside since, again, January of 2022, which was the beginning of the last bear market cycle. If Bitcoin finishes out September below 109,100. Now, again, all of these higher term time frames are coming into like super, super critical levels, generally levels that have been cautionary in the past. Doesn't mean it's always going to be that way, but, if Bitcoin wants to correct here down to the red moving average, that would not be uncharacteristic. We generally see reconnects with this on a quarterly time frame, or really on any higher term time frame, with each and every passing closure. And if it doesn't, then Bitcoin generally trades sideways until it does. So again, I just kind of keep all these things in the back of my mind. I want to be providing just the data is as it is. You take away your own conclusions. Obviously, you can kind of glean what I'm thinking myself. But look, in my opinion, if you're looking for this market to carry on to new all-time highs in the short term, I think that is a very unlikely thing to be happening. We've been saying the same thing now for a little over a month, and I'm sticking with that until proven otherwise. I'm not saying that it's impossible to prove otherwise. Of course, if Bitcoin rallies back above 117, I think that there's going to be a legitimate sort of question mark as to if all of this plays out. But for right now, these things are in the cards. And I do feel like, I need to, that's just what my channel is about, just presenting the fuck statistics. So that's what I'm going to speak about. Anyways, this has all probably been a lot of doom and gloom for a lot of people out there, because I was actually planning on doing a hopium video today, because there is one thing that is hopium, but even that's like pretty far away from being confirmed. In fact, right now it would be, it would be on the verge of being unconfirmed, I suppose. But anyways, perhaps I'll save that for next week. But here's the thing, and what I really want to kind of end this video with. So while I do think that Bitcoin is likely entering into a period of sideways and downside over the next month or two, I do think that aligns with a more long-term view on Bitcoin, that we will continue to see this stair-stepping behavior which has been very characteristic of this cycle where Bitcoin takes a leg up, it goes sideways for many months at a time, and then takes another leg up. And this is uncharacteristic of any cycle in the past, because any cycle in the past, once it has made new all-time highs, it's basically just been a straight fucking shot to new all-time highs from there until the high and then a parabolic blow off top. One of the amazing things that I learned from my mentor very, very early on was the way you go up is the way you come down. And in this case, this is very constructive. These stair steps up is great. When you go up like this, you go down like this as well. And that's not great, at least in my opinion. So in my opinion, it is my view that the longer that Bitcoin kind of draws this corrective period out, sideways and down, the better. And I think that actually could align with this market continuing to the upside in maybe very late this year, maybe very early 2026. I think that that's possible if this happens. The other scenario, of course, is let's just say all of these things are going to be wrong, or it's not. I mean, numbers are fucking numbers. They're not wrong. It's just the less likely thing happens, possible, just less likely. And Bitcoin shoots up to new highs from here. I think that we'd see a parabolic blow off top in a crazy fashion, probably somewhere around 150 to 200,000 bucks, just pulling out the same old numbers, right? And we'd probably see the same response after that as well as prior cycles. We'd probably see, a pretty big drawdown. I don't think it'll be as big as the past cycles, but I still think it would be maybe to 50, 60, maybe even 65%. And yes, a small percent difference at these huge numbers makes a tremendous difference, really. Imagine Bitcoin going up to 200,000, smashing back down to 100,000 bucks. That's just a 50% drop. That's, in fact, Bitcoin's never seen less than that in a market cycle before. In fact, it's never even seen less than like 77%, which would put Bitcoin doing some bad mental math, but maybe back around like 70 or 80,000 bucks. So that's a lot. That's a big fucking difference. Anyways. I would still keep an open mind here. As always, the picture is ever changing, ever evolving. But as of right now, for the long term, I am certainly leaning into that as the more probabilistically likely thing to happen. I hope that this is in some way useful to you. Again, don't just trust a random idiot like me on the internet. Do your own homework, do your own research. I hope that this can be of some value in giving you ideas and whatnot. And feel free to check my work as well. It's all good. Anyways, I'm going to be signing off on that note. As always, I want to wish everyone the best. Again, we have a few more days for our sale. Oh, shit, I lost the plate. Well, yeah, there it is. You already know the code. It's all good. Okay. Take care. Much love. And see you hopefully during a lovely little live stream on Friday.